So thank you all for coming here today. It's a wonderful occasion for us all to get together. I want to thank Minister Joe O'Brien, who has been very supportive of this work and very supportive in particular in the setting up of the community engagement team, and very supportive to John Eibhlin Byrne and I in the work that we're doing with civic engagement. So I want to acknowledge that today and to acknowledge the work that Marie does alongside him. I want to thank our colleagues in DRCD for putting together this conference. I know that Barbara Deardernadell put a lot of work into it in a very short space of time, but it's really valuable that we get this time together, not just to hear from the presenters this morning, which was really very interesting, but also to learn from each other and to get time to spend with each other. And very much welcome, like I'm sure you all do, the announcement by the Minister of the Community Connection project, because that's really where it's all at, is in the connections that we can make, because we don't need parallel roadways. We need to try to integrate more, we need to work more holistically, we need to work better together. And to the presenters this morning, I've had the privilege of hearing Tim speaking before. He never disappoints, and Tim is certainly very worthwhile listening to the comparisons with other countries and being reassured that we're somewhat on the right road. We have, like everywhere else around the world, we have a lot to do, but we are on the right road. Eibhlin, I really appreciate that notion of the brave spaces. I think that's really important. It was a good way, a good analogy. And I'll never look at the history of Sicily or Donegal again, Francis, in quite the same way. So my purpose today is really just to introduce us, the community engagement team. Around the room, there are lots of familiar faces who've guided me, pushed me, given out to me, told me what we're doing right and wrong, but most of all have been really supportive all across the country in the work that we're doing, and have really worked with us in a very collaborative way. So I want to take this opportunity of saying thank you. You have attended some really difficult meetings with us, you've stood alongside us in some very toxic situations, but you have supported us and helped us to do the work that we all know badly needs to be done. You'll remember that the community engagement team was set up last October by the Department of the Taoiseach and the Department of Children and Equality, and it was really in answer to the word that was coming back from the communities that while the very important work of accommodating people was being done, communities were being left behind and were feeling left behind, and it was very important that we try to engage in some way with those communities, and while it's a difficult challenge, at least insofar as we possibly can, to involve people in the decisions that we're doing. So we're very lucky that in the last month, the team has been brought together in the Department of Children under Fidelma, who's just joined us, and I want to welcome Fidelma. Fidelma will be leading the community engagement team and transparency in the Department of Children, and no doubt you'll all get to know her over the next few months. In the meantime, the civic engagement side of work will continue with myself, with John Toomey, and with Finbar Murphy, whom again I know that some of you will have met, but you will no doubt meet us all over the next few months when we have some challenges. Now, I'm not going to claim to be an expert in a room of experts, and the people who spoke this morning are very much experts in their field. So really, what I just want to share with you is perhaps some of my thoughts on what we have seen and encountered, some of my thinking on where we really need to go, and I suppose to put it in the broadest possible context, because sometimes feel in the department I'm almost like Janice. I'm facing two directions. In the department I'm fighting with more engagement and how to get communities, and then in communities I'm trying to justify why in the department we're having to make decisions in a certain way. So this morning I just wanted to share, I suppose, some of the thoughts that we've had about it. Just to put it first in a wider context, I've just come back from holidays in France where I spent quite a bit of time, and I'm very used to the French, constantly harking back to the revolution and how things had to be changed through revolution. But I was very struck this time when I was in France that not only were they feeling quite revolutionary, but there were signs up saying, oh, we can't get in the ballot box, we'll get on the streets. And I thought it was something just a little bit more eerie than I had heard in other years. And then, of course, we had events in the US over the weekend. So it does, I suppose, in many ways make us think about democracy. And last year, when he was in Greece, of course, the cradle of democracy, President Obama spoke of the need to fight for democracy. And I think that's something that we can become a little too complacent about in the world that we live in. President Obama noted that democracy is not self-executing. It depends on the engagement of citizens, the active mobilization of people around the belief in self-government and the rule of law. So it is not something that just happens. It is a very, very fragile flower that really does require watering from time to time. And in Ireland, we're at really quite an interesting stage of our history. Over the last few decades, we have judged church and state, and we have found them wanting. Old values are being challenged, but we haven't clearly defined what the new Ireland is, nor have we genuinely espoused a set of values which respects the old while embracing the new. And so it's against that background that we are now facing one of the greatest challenges that Europe has faced since the Second World War, with mass movement of people in Europe and indeed greater migration across the world. And I don't need to tell anybody in this room the facts. There are over 117 million people forcibly displaced in June 2024. More than 1 in 69 people are displaced. So those people come from 5 different countries. And I was just looking, in 1 year, we've gone from 1 in 73 people to 1 in 69 people. So the numbers are increasing very rapidly. As Filippo Grandi said, these figures show us that some people are far too quick to rush to conflict, but way too slow to find solutions. So while world leaders are finding solutions, we nevertheless have to deal with this huge challenge of the 21st century. The community engagement team was set up to ensure that that global context is brought to local communities, because those communities are really struggling in rapidly changing Ireland, in some cases trying to hold on to old traditions while espousing new cultures which are very new to them. We want to try to bring communities into dialogue and to reduce the disconnection both from world events but also from the centre where many of the decisions are made. The setting up of the community engagement team is an acknowledgement by government that a lot more work needs to be done to assist communities to understand the international context, be a part of national planning, and to work locally. So in essence, we need to think globally, plan nationally, and act locally. At the heart of everything, though, is the locality, is the community. It's the community that really matters. Let me share with you a defining moment in history, which was also a defining moment in my career. It's an experience which, more than any other, has taught me the power of engagement. On the 15th of August 2021, Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan, fell. The EEAS, several weeks before that, was anticipating the fall and contacted governments around Europe seeking refuge for some of their staff who they knew would be at risk should Kabul fall. An application was made to the Irish government for 40 people, and it went around in circles but finally landed on my desk because we had the Irish Refugee Protection Programme and there was no other mechanism for bringing people to Ireland. We agreed with Minister O'Gorman that we would allow these people to come, but when the list arrived there were 65 people on the list. And nobody wants to be in the position where they decide which 20 people you're going to remove from the list. So with a lot of pushing and shoving, and I see Niamh here, we appealed to local authorities to help us house our current refugees, and we found room for the 65. But of course, as media coverage was increasing, so was concern around the world about what would happen to certain groups in Afghanistan, and requests were made to government. I have to say that that was an experience where statutory government services really came together. If you like, we all left our ivory towers. So applications were made, our embassies in Abu Dhabi got up in the middle of the night to make papers, Department of Justice manned airports and contacted foreign airports to allow people onto planes, and we managed to do a certain amount. But more and more requests were coming in, LGBTQ groups, groups of women judges, groups of athletes. The applications were coming in and we couldn't answer those applicants. So my answer to people who contacted the department was, we can do the paperwork but we can't do any more. And people all around Ireland swiftly set up what I might call community light groups. It was a form of community sponsorship, but light and fast. It didn't have all of the training that is necessary for community sponsorship, but we only had a 6-week window because we knew Kabul was going to fall and there would be a very short period of time. Between all of us, we got about 700 people out from the original list of 40. That resulted from statutory, political, NGO, local communities all coming together, trying to find ways to get around the system as fast as we could. But to me, it was a very proud moment. In many ways, I suppose you might say it was almost our Dunkirk moment, even though it was a political crisis in a land and a culture far removed from our own. But I believe that the spirit we witnessed then is alive and well in Ireland and can be harnessed again, albeit in a more sustainable way. You can't do the kind of work we did in those weeks on a long-term basis, but there is a sustainable version of it that we can work towards. You ask yourself, how does a country that showed such a generosity of spirit and a capacity to move so fast in a crisis find itself now witnessing protests and burning of buildings? There is no easy answer to this complex issue, but I think there is some learning from our Afghan experience. People will engage when they are part of a project. Every movement needs leaders. Leaders need to abandon the ivory tower of their own tribe. Thinking globally and acting locally is not possible without also leading nationally. There can be, and there are, many disconnects along the way. Given the difficult environment against which the accommodation of those seeking the protection of the state takes place, it is often difficult, indeed impossible, to share information in advance. That is sad experience borne out around the country. Nevertheless, it is a huge challenge for us. Resources are under pressure in key areas, such as housing and medical services, such as GP access. Some areas of the country feel neglected by either government or statutory services, and of course there are always specific local issues at play. All of these issues find themselves expressed in negative reaction to those arriving, when in fact the real cause of grievance very often lies elsewhere. We need to pose the question as to what is a better way. We need to support communities, but we also need to remember that it is communities who lead. It must be communities in the driving seat in their area. Much thought and planning goes into integration and support for migrant arrivals. There also needs to be support for communities into whom arrivals arrive, and a clear strategy, planning and resources for those communities, especially for the people on the ground doing the work. Communities are currently being torn apart and indeed are being used and abused by others in the name of immigration. Those who support arrivals find themselves castigated by those who wish to retain the status quo. Those who object find themselves labelled racist and worse. Our Irish flag is used not as the symbol of harmony, but as a banner of hate. Some communities are being weaponised. It is true to say that some communities have legitimate fears. Some people have legitimate fears, others do not. Some take to the courts to voice opposition, others to the barricades. Some are overt in their opposition, some more subtle. That is the negative side. But throughout the country, there are people at every level offering a warm hand of friendship to those seeking protection, doing everything in their power to open doors for new arrivals, to make people feel warm and protected. There are groups throughout the country promoting an Ireland for all. The role of the community engagement team is to provide information when it is available to us and to respond to requests for facts. Importantly too, it is our job to engage in support of those wishing to welcome new arrivals and to assist those in opposition to address their fears and concerns in a constructive manner. It is about two things. It is about community and it is about engagement. This latter is challenging for all of us. International research would query the value of engaging with extremes, but not all those who protest are extremists. I would ask that we consider how we might support those opposing new arrivals. Recently, I was told somewhat tearfully by a lady opposing arrivals that she had been called far-right and racist by others. She really had no concept that her words and actions left her very open to exactly those accusations. Back to the French taking to the streets. What we do not solve around a table will be solved on the street. I would ask you to encourage your local community to engage, to share fears, and to work with us through CET and others so that we can discuss together and resolve our issues. We need to give people the correct narrative to avoid disinformation and misinformation. But we also need to give people the language and means to express both warmth and welcome, but also fear and disquiet, so that we can have an honest conversation that does not descend into hatred and racism. We are very conscious that CET is limited in its capacity. In fact, it should be, because our job is to make ourselves redundant. At least those of us working in government should be handing the power and decisions to communities as best we can, when we can. It is for communities to address the important issues for themselves, but with our support. In the meantime, communities need to be strengthened to engage, and that is the importance of our work. A learning project is currently being led by DCDIY, working with Doris Limney and Rachel Doyle, whom you will all know. This resulted from feedback received from many of you, that after the work of CET is done, there still remains a huge need for support and engagement in communities. We are looking to how we can best deliver on this. The purpose of the project is to look at good practice and learning throughout the country and to see how this can be shared with communities. The project will conclude over the next few weeks. Some emerging themes, which will be no strangers to all of you, relate to the strengthening of communities, inclusion, integration, and community resilience. They note the importance of a number of things: political leadership against racism and the spread of hate and fear in communities, strong community development approaches, which are delivered by people with experience and expertise in intercultural work and community work, harnessing and valuing the enormous work being done by local community members, strategies to maintain energy of local groups and avoid fatigue, building strong, resilient communities, provision of resources to those communities to draw as they see fit, a commitment from all stakeholders to work together to build social cohesion, good practice to be shared and communities networked, engagement with the middle ground who may be swayed in any direction. Community groups know the community and have the capacity to do this work. We are at the start of a very important journey which will shape the Ireland of future generations. It is no small service that is being asked of all of us to play our part in laying the ground for socially cohesive and inclusive Ireland. It is in all our interests. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, a book written against the background of another challenging time in history. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. Well, let's keep our feet on the ground, but rather than being swept off, let's make this that once in a lifetime when a great tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope in history rhyme, to quote one of Ireland's great. Thank you.